joining today and welcome to today's presentation, Operating Lean and Mean, an FD's Guide to Cost Cutting and Other Key Value Adds of the Finance Function. I'd like to say very much a big thank you to Tom Miller, who is presenting today. Tom Miller is the Group FD at UniLED Group, and his experience of helping fast-paced growth businesses from startup making significant contribution to the growth journey from 3 staff with revenue under 100k to a multi-million turnover organisation employing over 60 people. So thank you very much today, Tom, and I'd like to hand over to you. Tom will be sharing his screen, going through the presentation. We've got a Q&A to follow after the presentation. So if you could actually put your questions into the chat box, and then when we're ready, I'll introduce each person to present their question to the group and to Tom. So yeah, with no further ado, Tom, over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. Thank you very much to the exec group for inviting me to present today. Hope the presentation will take around 20-21 minutes to go through. So let me kick off by just giving a brief overview of what we're going to look at today. So I'm just going to focus on the presentation objectives for a minute or two. What we'll then do is go through the 3 sections of the presentation: the top 10 tips for cutting costs, improving the bottom line, managing cash flow in the post-COVID landscape, and also 5 ways the finance function can maximise its value to SMEs. And then obviously, as Christiane has said, we'll then wrap up with some questions. So just focusing quickly on presentation objectives, I think there are 3 key objectives for me today. One is that at least everybody can have one takeaway that's going to help you be a more effective FD. Secondly, helping you add value to your finance teams and your employer. And lastly, just passing on some useful knowledge and pointers from my personal experience working at these 2 fast growth SMEs over the last 10 years. So moving into the first section, cost cutting, my top 10 tips. I think, look, firstly, my biggest recommendation is what I call an OPEX review. I think on a quarterly basis, what you should be doing is combing through your general ledger account nominals on your accounting software at a very transactional, granular level of detail, and understanding if there are any expenses and costs there that you're just not using anymore. As you can see in the example there, with our business, we had SIMs we were renting that weren't using any data. We hadn't cancelled certain direct debits, and we'd oversubscribed on certain licenses. And this was only uncovered by actually performing that exercise. I can guarantee that when you do this, you will uncover something that you're paying for that you don't need to pay for. And if you do this exercise on a quarterly basis, there's definitely a lot of cost there that you can potentially strip out. Secondly, for me, when you're dealing with pillar heads within the business, I would be setting them a 10% saving from the very start of your budgeting process. So at the start, when you do your 0 plus 12, set them a 10% target. And then I said there, reach out to the MD or the HR director and incentivize this by tying it in with end of year bonus schemes. Thirdly, a headcount review. I would be doing this across all of the departments of the business, asking yourself, are you resourced or over-resourced, I should say, in any of the departments of the business? Can you outsource, even within the finance function? There's something like payroll or invoicing or any of the FP&A stuff that can be outsourced, saving you money. And also I'd be looking at what you can sub. Generally, we use a network of subcontractors, and by doing that, we don't have the fully loaded employee costs. So typically our employees will come with a van, a fuel card. The cost is almost double what we're paying them on a salary basis. So the subbing is a big way that you can cut costs. Fourthly, supplier renegotiation. I think this is a key one. How often are you actually reviewing your key suppliers' pricing and value for money? Have you discussed with them early repayment discounts, bulk buying discounts? I would be looking at your top 10 suppliers by spend. Again, use your accounting software, run a report, rank sort it, see where you're spending the most. And again, set yourself a target. How can I reduce this by 5-10% by entering into a renegotiation? Fifth for me is going electric. This is probably more relevant to fleet-based businesses such as ourselves, but we've carried out an exercise that we hope to implement this year. We've been able to identify 25 to 30% annual savings by switching only half of our fleet over to an electric vehicle. Although the initial sunk cost might be high, it's the long-term savings that you're going to enjoy by doing that. That's where the big cost saving comes from, particularly in the current climate. It's the fuel saving. And that's something that I would urge you to look into. Number 6, energy efficiency. It's not one we probably think about too often, but how energy efficient is your office? Make it more energy efficient. If you're using big offices, you have a huge amount of office space. Look at things like smart meters, ceiling insulation. Check if you've got any meters that you're not paying for, that you have there but you're not using and you're paying for. Are you getting the best deal from the energy provider as well? It's maybe too late now, given the recent price hike, but still worth investigating. Number 7, fleet management. Again, we're a fleet-based business, but we have introduced training, we've introduced speed limiters, things like that can help reduce costs by increasing your fuel efficiency, reducing accidents, fines, and repair costs. Another little nugget there is to look at employment contracts. If you've got employees that are driving within your fleet, there's a potential insurance excess clawback where you can split the cost of the excess if a driver has acted negligently and been involved in an accident. This acts as an incentive and also impacts on and influences driver behaviour. Fuel cards as well, another little nugget there. We switched from Velocity to All-Star and we're able to save around 7% a year on our fuel costs, which again was only uncovered by doing an exercise of comparing the 2 fuel card providers. And the last one there, the leases. Make sure you've got the maximum flexibility and consider switching models if you're paying too much on the existing models that you use. Number 8, insurance market exercise. Keep your broker on their toes. And if you haven't achieved a saving in the last few years, change your broker. There are definitely deals out there. We had a broker for 7 years. Our premiums were either flatlining or going up. We switched about 3 years ago and we achieved significant savings, particularly in our fleet policy, but also our commercial premiums as well. And in fact, I just got off the phone with the broker today. We're renewing our fleet policy. He's managed to find us another 30% reduction in our fleet. So I would urge you to do that and go out there and see if there are better deals. Number 9 is the property strategy. Again, it's obviously relevant if you've got quite a significant amount of space, but we all know, we've heard that in the post-COVID world, there's been an increase in remote working. Employees are keen to remain working from home. Have a look at your lease and check when the next rent review date is. See what rights you have within the lease as well, underletting or assignment rights. And what these allow you to do is you can stay tied into the lease, but you don't have to pay for the rent because you're assigning it to another occupier. I would check with your lawyers what the exact details are, but it's certainly something that we've looked at to reduce our office spend and the costs associated with the rent and rates. Lastly, on this section, process and procedure. This could probably merit its own presentation, but I would be looking at devising and implementing effective and relevant cost management processes and procedures that work for your business but strike the right balance. They're not too onerous, but they set the limits and set the rules that others in the business have to follow. And I've listed out quite a few examples there, which I'm happy to talk about in more detail offline. So just moving on to the next section, managing cash flow in the post-COVID landscape. Just going to focus on 5 areas here. A brief slide on what the landscape is. I think there are two drivers for me at the moment. There's the credit squeeze hangover, which happened after the credit crunch in 2008, and then was exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, we now have government-backed loan schemes that have ended because the pandemic is over. And as we all know, there is now an adverse trading environment. Geopolitical instability, inflationary pressure, a cost of living crisis, these are all supply and demand side shocks that are creating a very negative, adverse trading environment. So in terms of my, 5 top tips, I would be looking to arrange a time to pay deal with the revenue if you are concerned that you're not going to be able to afford the next VAT quarterly payment, or you have built up some legacy debt over the course of the pandemic. Now is a great opportunity for you to speak to the revenue and negotiate a time to pay. At the moment, there seems to be a sense that they are open to quite long-term deals. And although it can be luck of the draw, and it very much depends on your relationship building, as I've outlined there, we've recently agreed 2 time to pay deals for 4 years across both businesses. What I've said there on the slide is that communication is key, and you should definitely be planning ahead for when that is going to start. Build up trust as well, build up the trust with the revenue. So when you come to discuss it with them, you stand a better chance of agreeing the time to pay. And again, I've said that I'm happy to take this offline, give some guidance if anyone has any questions on that. Number 2, limited supplier pay runs. Limit when you pay your suppliers, have fixed dates, maybe 1 or 2 a month, and share this with the business, or share it with the wider business. This is finance dictating the pace and setting the tone, and this allows you to control your cash flow. What I would also do is provision separately. I would have a key supplier provision and a general supplier provision. You want to be paying your key suppliers, you don't want to damage the relationship, but by having a separate general supplier provision, you have the flexibility to reduce that if you need to conserve cash. Cash is tight. And also I would be saying that if there are any business critical payments, we know that things do need to be paid urgently, that you do ask for a concise business case to support that before approving it. Number 3, metronomic debtor chasing. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be persistent, but strike the right tone in chasing your clients for payment. It is more of an art than a science, but as I said there, the old adage that the squeakiest wheel gets the grease applies. We all know when suppliers chase us that it's the loudest supplier that often gets paid. I think the same applies on the flip side. But again, I would be looking at your debtor days, looking at your debtor book regularly, attacking the low-hanging fruit. And the more persistent you are, the more you diarize your chasing and keep records of it, the more success I think you'll have, and you'll improve your collections and reduce your debtor days. These last 2 are kind of joined together. It's obviously changing the invoice payment terms. Try and get those quarterly in advance if you can. It obviously does depend on the contractual situation that you have with your clients. But we have a business where it's predominantly recurring revenue based, but we do some non-recurring work. On the recurring side, we've got quarterly in advance terms for most of our clients. And then for project type work, we've insisted on 50% upfront, 50% on completion, always be net cash positive. You never want to be in a negative position. And what I would also say is if you are working with subcontractors, make it a condition before the project starts that you will only pay them in full or in line with your terms once the client has signed off on the project. Lastly, again, changing supplier payment terms. It's kind of the obvious one there, extending those for as long as you possibly can. But there's also some advice there on negotiating payment plans with your suppliers. Again, if you've got a particularly large invoice or 2 invoices that need paying, can you go to your suppliers? Can you negotiate a payment plan? Again, this is something that we found some of our suppliers have been receptive to. Important, obviously, you stick to it, but again, that can help And again, the key point is that communication is key. Don't ignore any suppliers. So moving on to the final section of the presentation, just 5 ways that the finance function, you as head of the finance function can maximise the value to the business that you're working for. I thought I'd just draw up this quote here, which I quite like. I don't actually remember who said it, and I can't find the person who said it, but I used it in another presentation. I thought it really sums up what we do quite nicely. The first way I think we can add enormous value is seeing ourselves as strategic business partners. We're more than just bean counters, we're bean growers, we're adding value. And we know that we do the budgeting and the forecasting, all the planning, but how else can we add value, the commercial value that's needed for a business? For example, inputting into the pricing strategy of the business. Get your teams to produce high value reporting that helps deliver the value adds that the business requires. Number 2 for me is providing data insights to the business. We know that we've often heard this term that data is the new gold. At a very minimum, we're expected as finance professionals to get the numbers right, to get them accurate. What we do is report on what's happened, but it's all about, I think, focusing on what numbers are important to the wider business, particularly in the future. That's where you get maximum value. And as I've said there on that slide, think about creating a KPI dashboard for the wider business with not just financial, but non-financial KPIs. And I've used a couple of, or 3 examples that we use as a business there that we're constantly looking at. And these do add value, not just to you doing your job, they add enormous value to the wider business, particularly the senior leadership team or board level members of the business. Number 3, lead your fundraising efforts. This is an invaluable skill. I have had absolutely no experience doing this when we carried out our first debt raise 4 years ago. But I was prepared to come out of my comfort zone and take it on, demonstrate leadership. I think it's hugely valued by the business. It would be a key part of doing what you do as a CFO. And if you don't feel 100% confident, consider upskilling. Go on a modeling training course, read up on business valuation methods, attend networking events. This will all help you and give you more confidence in what is a very, very important skill as an FD or CFO. Just moving on now to the last couple, just checking the time, we've got a few minutes left. Wear many hats. I think we probably do this organically, but if you want to add more value, I said there, offer the cross-functional support to what I call the natural sisters and brothers of finance, legal, HR, commercial. Particularly on the legal side, when it's enormously expensive to deal with lawyers, although you're not legally trained yourself, you can certainly bridge the gap between your external legal advisors and the business by carrying out certain key value adds that will be really valuable to the business that you work for. Things like doing a legal hygiene exercise, looking at your contracts with clients and seeing where you're potentially exposed and where you may have to mitigate that exposure. Have you missed a contractual price increase? It's very easy to sign a contract and let it sit in a folder somewhere, but you may have agreed that your pricing goes up in line with inflation annually, or there may be an incremental price increase that you've agreed with the client, but you've forgotten to apply it because the contract's been stored away somewhere. Go back, perform the legal hygiene exercise, and you may find that you uncover something that can be enormously valuable. And clearly, obviously, in that example, it's missed revenue, so it's very valuable. The last one, just as we wrap up now, kind of linked to the section that I spoke about earlier, the cash conservation, managing cash flow, that is absolutely critical. Probably should have been the first one, but I thought I'd save it till last. And I put in an interesting quote there in the top right-hand corner about why small businesses fail, which I'm sure everybody on the call is aware of. your ability to sustain and conserve working capital within the business, and in fact, making sure the business is fully solvent and well cash flowed, is probably the most valuable thing you will do as an FD or CFO. And it's about thinking about the other things that you can do, the other things that you can explore to achieve that. And I've listed a few there. But one of the most important things for me is to have a workable cash flow model. There is software out there that you can use, although we actually still use good old Excel. But by having that workable cash flow model, as I've said there, making it a 12-month rolling cash flow, you've got your full beam lights on, and it gives you the ability to achieve the feed forward control that's absolutely essential. So you will be able to see very quickly where potential pinch points are arising and deal with it as early as possible. But make sure that model is flexible, make sure it's also user-friendly for others in the business, and be communicating with the MD and leadership team about the cash flow situation so that they're fully aware and they're not acknowledging the key assumptions and the relevant commentary around the cash flow that you're updating on a weekly or fortnightly basis. I think that's the 20 minutes up, so I'll stop there. Just going to flash up this last slide, which is the contact details. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to email. I've put the company websites on there as well, and you've got my LinkedIn details there as well. Please do feel free to get in touch. Thank you very much for your time.
Lois, you're on mute. Sorry, I went back to unmute there. Yes, I just wanted to say thank you very much, Tom, for that, all that fantastic information and for taking the time to prepare that presentation. It's if anybody does have any questions that they'd like to put directly to Tom, please do pop your question in the chat box, and then you can pose that directly to the group and to Tom. I think that I don't know whether you mentioned, Tom, actually, I had something that I wanted to ask you. I know you said
Sure.
that you do a lot of your cash flow reporting still on Excel. I mean, I suppose as a broader question, and I know that these are things that we've discussed on our virtual boardrooms for FDs previously, but how does your FP&A function work, or how do you drive that?
I mean, do you mean specifically with regards to cash flow, or you're talking about the other FP&A bits that we do as a business? Yeah,
I think the broader sort of KPI analysis and forecasting.
Look, we're still very much Excel driven on that front. I mean, there is a big spreadsheet that I'm responsible for maintaining, which has all of the KPIs on it, and it's the responsibility of the other pillar heads within the business to update their KPIs. I will have overall supervision of it, and supervision and be responsible for updating the finance element of it. But on a weekly basis, these individuals are responsible for inputting information into that KPI dashboard. And then it's available. We use Microsoft Teams. We share that with those individuals who are able to populate the information. And it's maintained on a weekly basis. So we are very much Excel driven. There is technology in the background supporting certain functions that drive the day-to-day business, but we are still very much Excel driven. We do use other bits of software. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. I think James has a question for you. So James, if you'd like to unmute and present your question to Tom, that'd be great, please. Thank you.
Yeah, very happy to, and thanks, Tom. I thought it was absolutely brilliant and summed up almost the whole role in a few minutes. Nothing I can disagree with there. also commend the use of Excel rather than being a slave to the software, because you can control that much better and communicate exactly as you want to. I think that's perfect. Right, the question. So this assumes a company in a sort of steady state, presumably growing, potentially, with an eye on cash flow, but not in financial distress, which unfortunately I do have experience of. Presumably, some of the things and some of the focus is going to change if you're going through a particular period of change. And the two things I'm thinking of are, number one, you want to do you call it investing in growth, but actually that would mean probably loosening up on some of the P&L items, spending more on marketing, incentivizing people, maybe loosening supplier terms just to get the top line moving, and exploring new business segments. The second is if the whole P&L and balance sheet needs to be tidied up, pending M&A, where different rules, different things might happen. I'd be interested in your perspective on one or both of those. So
go on, just repeat the first one. I think the first one was probably one I'd take. Just repeat that.
Yeah. So if say for you have a new product, or you decide that you want to push for sales in a particular segment.
Yeah.
So you might want to slightly change your terms in order to incentivize more sales. You might want to offer better terms and invoices. You might want to incentivize your staff. You're obviously going to have a marketing budget.
Yeah.
So some of the rules that you've set out, which are super lean and not at all mean, which is great. And because you can never be mean, but some things you're going to have to sort of potentially flex.
I think I agree with that. I would say probably my presentation was pivoted more towards the solutions business, which is more of a complicated legacy type business, whereas the other business is more frictionless. It's a software type business. In that business where we've developed two software products, I would agree that there are times along the growth journey of a business where you probably have to abandon some of the rigorous, strict cost-cutting measures that are usually expected in your role as an FD or running the business in the correct way. And that's certainly been the case with the software business that I'm involved with. We've gone through quite a difficult time, particularly because the business only started trading at the end of 2017, so 4.5 years. So it really only had a couple of years before the pandemic hit, and we've had an absolute nightmare with the pandemic. We fortunately got through it, but we took the approach, quite a bold approach, that we wouldn't actually cut headcount. We wouldn't cut some of the budgets like advertising and marketing, which you've mentioned, because our strategy was very much, let's be well prepared for when the pandemic ends, so that when it does end, we're in a stronger position to capitalize on the market opportunity that we have within that particular niche sector, which is out of home ad and display verification. So look, I don't think it's always has to be the default position for any FD or CFO or any business to just be so cost focused and be absolutely driven by cost control. I think that there are times when I would agree that if you are going on a growth journey, you can loosen some of those tight rules and processes and procedures and accept that that is a necessary part of getting to where you want to be, to executing on any growth strategy that you have. So hopefully that answers your question.
That's fantastic, Tom. Thank you very much indeed. I would just add one thing on the M&A side, which I have lots of experience of. You see this bizarre thing again and again. Where there are identifiable cost savings, a buyer will place a discounted value on that, which is sometimes, this is kind of bizarre. Sometimes the value attributed to synergies in a bidding war is more than the value that would be attributed to the profit stream that you would be getting if you made those cost savings. Mm-hmm. That obviously applies to direct salaries, but people might be moving on and known headcount changes. But the bizarre thing is, pre-M&A, it is possible to have some fat in the P&L rather than maximizing profits, and you might get a better capital value as a result. because the synergies are so visible and clearly presented.
Yeah, I think I take that point as well. At some point, we will look to hopefully make exits on both businesses. And absolutely, there is a strong argument to be made when you are presenting your numbers, your forecast to a potential acquirer, that even though the business might not be as profitable as you'd like because you have struggled to cut costs out or you've been struggling to grow the top line, that via the synergies that you're going to achieve through the acquisition, there's definitely significant cost savings that can be made there. So it's more about looking at the post-acquisition position of the business rather than being focused on the current performance of the business. So yeah, I take your point on that and would agree.
Fantastic, thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Tom. I think Claire Pickering, I think you have a question. Please do go ahead.
Yes, I concur with James. Hi, Tom. Great presentation.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You mentioned you moved insurance brokers. That resonated with me because we're environmental consultancy, and our professional indemnity insurance went up threefold this year at the last minute with not much, it was too late to even think about switching or trying a different broker. But my question is, how did you go about finding a new insurance broker? How many did you approach, and how did you decide which ones to approach?
It was very simple. It was through my existing network. I, on LinkedIn, just put out a message saying that we're looking for a new insurance broker. This was, just to explain the background on that, it was kind of a legacy or inherited broker. When I joined the business started trading around 2010. I joined early 2012. And we'd inherited this brokerage. It's one of those things that we didn't really focus on. And it was just absolute madness. There was no effort made to look at how we might save money, particularly as the business grew. There was just this organic increase in the premiums. I got enormously frustrated because I could see that we were just paying too much. And I just put a message out on LinkedIn and said, look, does anybody know any good brokers? And instantly I got quite a few messages. But it was that funny enough, we got one message from somebody that knew the owner of the business who put us in touch with that broker, and we went from there. And he's absolutely fantastic, and I'm more than happy to share details. If you want to drop me an email or a message on LinkedIn, I'll definitely connect you if you'd like.
Yeah, will do. Thank you, Tom.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
That's great. Thanks, Tom. Anybody have any other questions they'd like to pose whilst we're on the call?
I was just going to mention, Claire, I don't know whether you're part of the Guild group. We've got a group on the Guild app called the FD and CFO Network, and there's like 700 and odd members currently. So that would be possibly a good one to ask to the group. And if anyone has got any recommendations for brokers, they may be able to share details with you.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. Yes, I'll look into that. Thank you.
And
because I'm pretty sure I'm connected with our current insurance broker on LinkedIn, so that's the danger. Get a very panicked phone call from him first of all.
Yeah, and that Guild app that Chris just mentioned is just for FDs and CFOs, so like-minded peers, etc. Very active in terms of people looking for advice and discussing business issues. So well worth putting a question on that. I think sorry, I can only refer to you as DT, but I think you have a question to pose to Tom. Thank you.
I do. And I hope you can hear me. I muted all my devices. It's David.
Hi.
Everyone calls me DT. That's fine. A quick one. I guess everyone's experienced this, but just interested in your view. You say you target your budget holders with a 10% reduction.
Yeah.
No, we've all seen this. How do you stop them building a 10% slack already into the budget when they build it up? We do it, and we do it globally for years, and these 10% go up and up and up and up and up and up, just on revenue and in cost.
It's a good question. Very good question. I think if you've been in the business for a long time, or even if you haven't, if you've only been in for a year or two, I would be looking at historic spend, historic actual spend, and I would be understanding what the trend, what the run rate is for those particular budgets. Then you can very easily understand if a 10%, if that 10% slack has been built in to the budget. There are other things I think that you have to take into consideration anyway, inflation being the obvious thing, particularly on those things that are particularly sensitive to inflation. But that's certainly one way that I would combat that. What I'd also be looking to do is I'd be setting up very quick meetings, maybe half an hour, that doesn't even have to be that 15 minutes, with those budget owners, and getting them to justify line by line why they've put in or submitted that amount for the particular budget. And you can interrogate the numbers, and you'll soon be able to understand whether or not that additional 10% slack has been built in. I think the other thing I would say on that is it all depends, doesn't it, on your approach to budgeting. You can take a very ruthless approach and perhaps take the zero-based budgeting approach, or you can be more flexible. I think I would prefer, and the way I approach it is to be slightly more flexible with pulling levers as and when you need to, because what you don't want to be is completely turned off or completely removed from the needs and requirements of the business. But I think, yes, you have to interrogate those numbers, and I would do it by booking in a separate session and running through it, and then you should hopefully be able to identify if that 10% has been built in, and certainly by comparing with historical actuals, you should be able to identify that.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're on mute, Lois.
Great, thank you, Tom. Yeah, I was just saying, I think thanks, James has recommended an insurance broker. I'm sure we all saw that, and hopefully that will help Claire as perhaps a first point of call. Any other questions before we wrap things up today? As Chris mentioned, the conversation can continue on the Guild app. Christiane will send round a link to be able to register on that app for FDs and CFOs after the meeting, and Tom has very kindly obviously offered for direct chats on LinkedIn with regards to any support or sharing of information. So I don't think we've got any other questions at the moment, but they normally arise afterwards anyway, once we've had time to reflect. So just leaves me to say thank you very much to Tom for taking the time to actually create the presentation and present today. And additionally, thank you to all those who were able to join. I do hope you found it very useful. I know I have. We'll be obviously we do one of these a month, always presenting on topical issues relating to finance. So please look out for the May one. And we hope to see you all again. Once again, thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.